Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 300 of the Medieval Podcast. I'm your host, Danièle Cybulskie. So here we are at episode 300, and I can hardly believe it. 300 sounds like just such a huge number and nothing that I would have ever guessed I would get to when I started this just using GarageBand in 2019. And as I've said before, my first episode with Kathleen Kennedy, I had to record twice because I was just so bad at this. So this is pretty incredible, 300 episodes. Thank you for being here for 300 episodes. And what did you think of the new music? First of all, I want to thank Geefrog, whoever they are, wherever they are, for creating that beautiful music Beyond the Warriors, which I was able to use royalty-free. And I'm so grateful for composers who will put their music out and allow it to be shared, because when I was starting up, I had nothing. I had no budget for this sort of thing. And so I'm very grateful to composers like Geefrog for allowing people to use royalty-free music. So shout out, salute, hats off to Geefrog. Thank you for allowing us creators to use your beautiful music. Now, I'm so excited about having some new music, not only because I wanted original music for a long time, but because this is actually composed by my really talented little brother, Christian Overton. He is an amazing composer. And you might ask, why didn't I ask Christian beforehand? Because he's really busy. He's booked all the time. He is a jazz trombonist in Toronto, and he's an amazing composer. And if you ever want to have a great night out listening to jazz, keep your eyes peeled for the Composers Collective Big Band, which he leads. You can see some really amazing original music in Toronto, which is just awesome. So shout out to Christian. I've already sent him a bunch of heart emojis, but send him your virtual heart emojis. Christian was the person who performed trombone, recorder, and tambourine on this track. So this is very exciting, especially because it gives me an opportunity to tease him about playing the recorder. But also a shout out to Maya Kiltron, another amazing Toronto musician, for playing strings on this track. I've seen Maya perform as a vocalist, and she's amazing. So check out her music as well. So I hope that you love this music. I love it. Definitely stick around to the end of the episode because I'm debuting new end music as well. Also composed by Christian, performed by Christian and Maya. So I'm super excited about this. I know how lucky I am to have a really supportive family. And when you're doing something that is creative, that puts yourself out there, that means taking a bunch of risks, it's awesome to have your family have your back. So Christian is one of my little brothers who's been supporting me all along. And you may not know this, but my 5-Minute Medievalist logo was designed by my other little brother, Eric Overton, who is an amazing illustrator. And he took this thing that I'd cobbled together through baby Photoshop, and he made it this beautiful graphic design that I just can't get enough of. And not only is my 5-Minute Medievalist design awesome, but it also is the inspiration for the woodcuts that ended up in How to Live Like a Monk and Chivalry and Courtesy. So Eric's work was able to inspire Anna Lobanova as well. So 2 brothers are already awesome. I actually have an older brother too, who I haven't roped in to helping me with the podcast yet, but he is also another awesome person. So yeah, I need to gush about my family for a while. And I hope that when you're listening to this, you're thinking about all the people that support you as well in your projects. There is one more family member who I want to give a shout out to, although he prefers to remain anonymous, and that is the person who does the editing for this podcast. So makes me look good, makes my guests look good, makes Peter look good every week. He prefers to remain anonymous, as I've said, but a shout out to you, editor, for making us all look amazing every week. And there is one more person I want to give a shout out to who I'm not related to, but they're from Northern Ontario, so close enough. And that is Virginia, who I hired, a year or so ago to help me get this organized. So Virginia helps me a few hours every month to make sure that this podcast keeps going. So if you've noticed over the last year or so, there are fewer gaps in my episode production schedule. That is because of Virginia. So shout out to you, Virginia. Thank you so much for helping me with all of that stuff. no woman is an island, no podcaster is an island. And it's my pleasure to be able to bring forward some of the people who have helped me so much over the years. Am I getting too mushy? Maybe. But I think it's important to send out appreciation to the people who help us get where we are. And I'm really, really grateful to the people I have named, as well as all sorts of people that I haven't named, including a huge number of guests on the Medieval podcast, like so many guests. And what is awesome about this, and one of the reasons why everyone should take an opportunity to reach out to people who you think are interesting, is that I've made all sorts of new friends through this podcast. And that is one of the best parts of the whole thing. Enough with the mushiness. Okay, let's get to your questions, because I promised for this episode I would answer your questions. And I did realize that a lot of people were pretty shy and they didn't want to put their questions out there. But I will answer the ones that were sent in to me through Patreon, through Instagram, and then just personally. There were a couple questions that were asked to me personally. So let's get to them. The first one is from Luke Gauchi on Patreon. And he says, we say that Rome fell in 476 CE, well, the Western Empire. But we also know that it didn't really, because the Goths kept institutions such as the Senate. My question to you is this. How long did the idea of the Western Roman Empire linger in the collective memory? Did Justinian's reconquest in the 6th century revive the idea of the empire in the mind of the people? Or was the Western Roman Empire just a distant memory that lived on in the East in the minds of the people who were living at the time? Okay, good question. The Roman Empire. How often, Luke, do you think about the Roman Empire? So this is a good question. And the answer is that everybody thought they were Roman all the time. So when we talk about the Western Roman Empire receding or falling or collapsing or whatever expression we want to use, and Rome really moving to Byzantium, Anthony Caldelis on the podcast talked about the people in Byzantium really considering themselves Romans, even when they were speaking Greek more often than they were speaking Latin, which was most of the time. In the West, people still thought of themselves as Romans. And this is really interesting because it comes back to the idea of legacy. So even though people are calling themselves Romans, it's because they want to attach themselves to the legacy, not because they want to live as the Romans did. So in the West, you have what became the Holy Roman Empire because people were still thinking of themselves as descendants of Rome, even though they did things differently. So like, we are Romans, but we're going to have a different system of government. So we have people like Charlemagne, who's an emperor, considered an emperor, called an emperor, but his structure around him was more like that of a king. And so this, again, is more to do with what do we want to call ourselves in terms of the identity that we want to present. We want to associate ourselves with the learning of Rome, the power of Rome, the might of Rome. So I think for people who were living in the West, what used to be the Western Roman Empire, they never really let go of the idea of Rome or the hope of it. And they really felt themselves to be the successors of that, which of course creates conflict when you have an emperor that is in Byzantium that says, wait a second, I'm the emperor of the Romans. So there is a tension always, but basically everybody still thinks that they are Roman, no matter what, even though they're going to do things differently. And if this sounds crazy, think about how many people today want to think of themselves as descendants of the Roman Empire as well. Like that question, how often do you think about the Roman Empire, has to do with people wanting to access that legacy and really elevating it, whatever they want it to mean. They are part of this legacy of the Roman Empire because of whatever reason they come up with. So the Western Roman Empire may not have looked at all like the actual Roman Empire had when we get into the Middle Ages. But I think for the people that were living at the time, the fact that they were the successors of Rome was very real to them. It was something that they wanted to believe and that they integrated as part of their identity. And that sort of changed over time as the parts of what had been the Holy Roman Empire start to break up. So that's my take on it. And I hope that answers your question. It's a good question because all of these things are messy, right? All of these things are messy. The dates that we use to delineate between one time period and another, and the labels that we use. Is this an empire? Is it a kingdom? All of these things are messy. So it's a good question, and one that I think people are going to disagree with me about, and that will continue to be in debate. But that is history. That is what we should be doing when we are talking about history, is to keep investigating, keep asking questions. So thank you for yours. So the next question on Patreon is from Butt Elf. Hello, Butt Elf. Thank you for your question, and thank you for the congratulations on episode 300. I appreciate your kind words. Thank you so much. So, Butt Elf's question is, if I had to pick a favored figure, would I choose William the Conqueror or Harold Godwinson? Which one do I prefer? Or Harold Hardrada? Out of the three, who is my favorite? Well, Butt Elf, this is a difficult one, because I think that I really wouldn't want to have a beer with any of these guys. They are the kind who cares about conquering things, and I am not a person who cares about conquering things. So there is that. So a tough question. We have Harold Hardrada, who is trying to take over Britain. He's attacking in the north of England, and Harold Godwinson is heading up there to take care of business up there before heading down to Hastings to take care of William the Conqueror. So it's hard to know much about these people as people. Are they people that we would want to care about, that we would want to succeed? Hard to know, especially because the people who write about historical figures are usually people who are glazing them, right? Saying these people are awesome. Of the three, with the caveats that, not into conquering people or killing people at all, not into conquest, I might have to go with William the Conqueror, because for all that he's a terrible person, some of the things that he did to establish new rules, new law, new ways of doing things in England, I think are very interesting, very organized, very forward thinking. And again, I just have to be so careful here, because obviously conquering people is bad. William did things like creating those big, strong, beautiful castles, like taking an inventory of everything that's going on in Britain. So I think that what I could maybe quote unquote appreciate about the project was that he takes on this new territory and he immediately sets about organizing it so that it makes sense. And maybe this has something to do with me being a person who just loves organization. I love things that are sort of neat and clean so that I can think clearly. So maybe this is something to do with it. Obviously, would I back the conquest of another land? No, I wouldn't. But there are some things about William the Conqueror as a leader that maybe I would prefer in a leader over the other two as leaders. A tough question, but a good question. And I know people always want the answer to those questions. Who do you prefer? With all of the caveats, I think I would have to go with William the Conqueror. Okay, so the next question is Glynis Campbell. And Glynis had emailed me earlier in the year to talk about medieval novels. So shout out to Glynis. She is a fiction writer for people who love romantic stories about the Middle Ages. This is not a question about romance. This is a question about women's work. So Glynis asks, since needlework was traditionally considered a woman's occupation, could women have been responsible for the design and embroidery of early pieces like the Bayeux tapestry? First of all, I have to say, well spotted, Glynis, because the Bayeux tapestry is not a tapestry. It is actually an embroidery. And so increasingly in the scholarship in medieval studies, we are calling it the Bayeux embroidery. We still acknowledge that people are calling it the Bayeux tapestry and probably always will. So for people who are like, why can't we just call it the Bayeux tapestry anymore? It's because a tapestry means something different. So creating a tapestry means you are putting the design in the actual weaving itself. Whereas with the Bayeux embroidery, and I'm probably going to call it the tapestry again, but the Bayeux embroidery, the design was put on top of something that had already been woven. So the Bayeux tapestry, and I had to look this up because it's not stuff that I know right off the top of my head. The Bayeux tapestry, according to its official site, is 224 feet long. And it's made up of 9 linen panels. I have to also appreciate Glynis because this gave me the opportunity to go back to one of my favorite books, which is The Medieval Clothier by John Lee, who was on the podcast a while back and was just an absolutely lovely person. So I got to look back at The Medieval Clothier and see that this would definitely have been made on a vertical loom, at least the weaving part, the linen part. So when you're picturing how this was created, picture a vertical loom. If it's before the 13th century, people are using vertical looms. They start to use horizontal looms after that. So you can see this in different images from the medieval period. If it's a horizontal loom, it is 13th century or later. And this is really cool. If you go back to John Lee's book, you can see how much faster production was once the horizontal loom came about. So it's made from linen. Often things that are made from linen, panels made from linen, are less wide, and that's the case with the Bayeux tapestry as well. So to give you a sense of the size of this, 224 feet long, 9 panels means each of the panels is 25 feet long. So that is huge. The person who knows maybe the most about the Bayeux tapestry is a woman called Dr. Alexandra Lester-Macon. And she actually has her PhD in early medieval embroidery. So this is how much of an expert she is on the Bayeux tapestry. She's got a really cool article out that makes all of this stuff really clear in History Extra. It's about 6 years old now, but worth looking at. So in a nutshell, the Bayeux embroidery is created on linen. It is stitched in wool, and it's stitched in a way that is very, very precise. It's probably the work of women, because women were the ones who had these skills in Norman England. And Dr. Lester-Macon has found that this is probably created somewhere around Canterbury. She believes from her research that this was probably created by teams of people under a professional manager. So your question, Glynis, was, could this have been designed and embroidered by women? It was probably embroidered by women. It may have been designed by a man, in that embroideries like this, sometimes or often people would create the design first. So they would sort of sketch out the design on top of the panel, and then it would be embroidered. And Dr. Lester-Macon has figured out that for the Bayeux embroidery, people had created the outlines first, and then they filled them in. And they did this in a way that was really consistent, which implies that it was done by teams of people over time, the same people in the same spot. So not just being farmed out all over the place by random people, that this was a collective effort commissioned by a person, executed by a team of people. So this is really interesting work. Again, check out Dr. Alexandra Lester-Macon's work on this. So cool. So was it designed by a man or a woman? I don't know. For the people who are interested in how many naked men or happy horses were in this, perhaps that implies that there were people who cared about that. So maybe not nuns embroidering this or designing this. We don't really know. The consensus, as much as you can get a consensus in history, is that this was commissioned by William the Conqueror's half-brother, Bishop Odo, for maybe the new cathedral at Bayeux, the Cathedral of Notre Dame at Bayeux, at the end of the 11th century. But there is a lot that we still don't know about the Bayeux embroidery. But yes, well spotted. Things like this would have been created by women because they were the ones who had this skill. So even though in a lot of the guilds throughout the medieval period, the biggest, highest up professionals, just like in culinary skills today, tended to be men, weavers, for example. For this work, it would have been done probably by a team of women. And again, Dr. Lester-Macon thinks this was happening in Norman England, probably somewhere around Canterbury. Really interesting stuff. And again, this really shows why it's so important to go back to things that we've already looked at before and have another look at them now that we know more things. So thank you for this question. Really awesome. So the last question on Patreon is from Fraser. And Fraser asks me another tough one. Why do Europeans know so little of the spread and resilience of Christianity in Asia and Africa for more than a millennium? And how can it be rectified? Good question. And this is a tough question because it brings us into territory that maybe we don't like to look at too closely. So whenever we look at something, a big question like this, it's important to ask the same question that investigators ask when they're doing police work, and that is cui bono. So who benefits? Who benefits from us not knowing a lot about the spread of Christianity in Asia and Africa? Well, the answer is Europeans at this point. So when it comes to the actual medieval period, we have to think about how many people may have been reading. What were they reading? Where would they get information from? And there's an episode I have coming up with Dr. Sharon Kinoshita talking about Marco Polo. So listen up for that one, because that tells you a little bit about the type of information that was being passed around medieval Europe. But when we think about rising literacy rates sort of chasing the printing press, and when we think about the printing press appearing at the end of the 15th century, around the time when people are exploring and finding new places and building up what we now call the transatlantic slave trade, when we think about people starting to read and be educated by books around this time, it's really bad for the transatlantic slave trade as a business for anybody to think about the people in Africa or Asia as being the same as quote unquote us, as in Europeans. So it's much easier to enslave people and trade them for money if you don't think of them as people, if you don't think of them as the same as us. So the first answer to your question is that when it comes to Christianity in Africa, it was bad for the slavers and the people who were profiting from the enslavement and sale of people to humanize them. And we see this throughout history. It is much easier to treat people badly when you dehumanize them. And so I would imagine that not teaching people about the Christianity of African peoples, the peoples whom we know were Christian during the medieval period, if we don't talk about that, then it's a lot easier to exploit these people. So this is part of your question here. When it comes to Asia, I think that there is also sort of an economic interest that is backing, not chasing the threads of Christianity that have spread throughout Asia. And part of that is it is easier to sell things that are coming from Asia. So things like silk or tea or that kind of thing. If you make it sound exciting and exotic, if you make it sound different, this is a really great selling pitch for the people who are trying to get you to buy the things that they are importing from Asia. And again, the more people start to recognize that people from Asia are just like the people from Europe, the less attractive it might be from a marketing perspective. So I think a lot of it has to do with economics, and not in a pretty way. People don't want to think too hard about the moral complexities of exploiting people. It's just easier to shut your eyes and let this happen. And so when it comes to later, I was initially talking about the printing press in the early part of the transatlantic slave trade. When it comes to the 19th century, when people are starting to really dig up stuff about the Middle Ages and think about Europe and its past and all of that stuff, these are national projects, right? So this is going to prove our Frenchness or prove our Germanness or prove our Italianness. And so I spoke to Robert Bartlett, that's going to be an episode coming up in a few weeks again, about nationalism and how that really informed the project of bringing up information from the Middle Ages. So again, from a nationalistic point of view, where you're trying to figure out what makes us us, what makes us different, it's better to exaggerate the differences between you and someone else. And these are projects that, again, are very, very fraught. When you look at them, you always have to look at who benefits. And honestly, it is white Europeans that tend to benefit from this sort of thing by not looking too closely at the similarities. In this case, the Christianity that was being practiced in Africa and Asia. And then there's another piece to that, which is, I think, people just like simple stories. And I see this as the voice of experience here. I've had lots of conversations with people, and I've told you about relatives who are very supportive of my work. And I've had relatives that are very supportive of my work while also not wanting to hear it. That means I have had people push back at me for things that I've said, like people in the Middle Ages didn't think the earth was flat, or that Genghis Khan didn't just kill everyone he ever met. Like, I've had a lot of pushback from people about that because they like the stories as they are. They don't want to change them. The number of people who have asked me questions about the Middle Ages and then been disappointed with my answers is immense, because people like simple stories, and they like stories that have magic in them. Stories that are surprising or shocking or whatever. When we think about the Middle Ages, we think about it as being maybe a violent time because that's exciting. And if we think of these people as being just like us, like just ordinary people who put their pants on one leg at a time, maybe that's less exciting. So when it comes to looking at other continents, the stories that they want, the stories that they remember, the stories that they want to keep, are stories of exoticism, stories like, wow, fantastic. And once those stories are entrenched, it's very hard to dislodge them. Again, this is just my take on it, but examining our own misconceptions about things, it's uncomfortable work, which is why a lot of people will avoid it. But the second part of your question is, how do we fix this? And we fix this by looking at our own misconceptions, by looking at things that have been blind spots for us personally in the past. And so when I talk to people about how I approach the medieval podcast and myth busting and all of this stuff, one of the things that's important to me is to not really bang on about people being wrong and stupid and shame people for the things that they believed before. And the reason for this is that we don't come out of the womb having beliefs about the Middle Ages. We learn them from somewhere. And so it's not really our fault if we've learned something wrong, but it is our responsibility to have a look at things that we think we know and investigate whether they are true or not. So how do we get people to learn more about the spread of Christianity or how it was practiced in other places in the world? We just keep talking to them about it. And not everyone is going to want to hear this. Not everyone's going to believe us. People are going to push back. That is just all part of the process. But the more we do it, the more we have discussions, the more we talk about our similarities and our differences and the information that keeps being discovered every day in the archives from archaeology, all of these things, the more we discuss it, the better it is for everybody. And so this is part of my mission here at the Medieval Podcast, to bring forth the things that people are discovering in the Ivory Tower, to show them to you, to us, so that we can discuss them, so that we can re-examine what we thought we knew and hopefully change people's worldview, change people's ideas and conceptions, not only about the Middle Ages, but about each other in a way that hopefully makes us more compassionate, makes us understand each other's perspectives better. And I know that this is very idealistic, but it is the reason that I do what I do. And so I hope this gets at what you were asking. I hope this answers your question, or at least the best that I can do. And thank you for asking that question. So the next question is from Instagram, and it's from Ruby Not Studying. And this is a spicy question. So if you have little kids around, maybe you want to cover their ears for a second. But it's a good question. It's a good question. Ruby Not Studying says, I just cannot understand men's hose and jerkins. What exactly was covering the ass and the eggplant emoji? Good question. Okay. I think this is really interesting because fashion is interesting. It tells us so much about society. People who have studied recent history, modern history, the last century or so, talk a lot about hemlines going up and down. And when it comes to the past, we tend to be talking about men's hemlines coming up and down. So that's interesting already. Fashion changing over time and it being about how short or how long your tunic is. So tunics are ancient. People are used to having people bending over in the fields in their tunics and maybe seeing too much of your relatives or neighbors and you want to. This is just something that has been happening for a really long time by this point. People in the ancient world hanging around by the Mediterranean weren't wearing their togas all the time. They were wearing tunics. So this is something that people have been used to for a really long time. When it comes to the medieval world, around the 14th and 15th century, tunics get pretty short. In fact, they really do show sometimes some well-defined buttocks in medieval manuscripts. You could check those out. One of the articles I did for medievalist.net a long time ago, Peter found a really good picture of somebody with these slipper socks, and you can really see everything he's got on display at the back. And so people at the time were complaining a little bit that these things were too revealing. But I do think that this is probably a matter of high fashion. So when we're talking about fashion, there is the fashion that is creative and on display and stuff worn by the elites. And then there's the stuff worn by everybody else. So I don't think that you have like super short tunics being worn around the marketplace by most people. I think most people would have their bits covered by their tunic. By the way, they are wearing woolen hose, which is tied at the top. This is homespun wool. It could be really fine. It could be really coarse, but it's probably not quite as revealing as bike shorts today as spandex can be. And it's also important to remember that when you're walking down the street, you see a cyclist that's stopped for a second to have a drink. You notice that they're wearing bike shorts. Maybe you're a person who takes an extra look at them, but then you just move on with your day. So I think that this is part of it as well. Like, there it is, but then we just move on with our lives. But when I'm talking about high fashion, I think these are the ones where you have pretty tight leggings that are made of really fine wool. And maybe they're showing things off. And this is a different thing. And when I think about that, it helps to think about the things that people are doing in fashion today. So right now, what I'm thinking of is Jeff Bezos' wedding, which is in some senses a very medieval event because it's a wedding that takes several days. It's got this massive budget that people complain about because that money could have been used for something else. I mean, this is a tale as old as time. But one of the things that happens at Jeff Bezos' wedding, from what I've heard, is that there is a pajama party. And so I've seen pictures of this pajama party because I was like, what do celebrities wear to sleep? Or at least, what do they want people to think they wear to sleep? You know what I'm trying to say. And Kim Kardashian showed up wearing something that I am 100% sure that she doesn't sleep in. This is a very revealing outfit. It's very sexy. It's meant to catch people's attention. But this is not what normal people wear. It's certainly not what normal people wear to sleep. So when I think about high fashion and the type of fashion that priests are complaining about, this is normally the elites. It's not everybody every day just wearing super tight hose. But one of my favorite things about this fashion for super tight hose is David Green, who was one of my earliest guests on the Medieval podcast. In his book on the 100 Years' War, he talks about a priest who blamed the Black Death on men wearing hose that was too tight. In fact, it was so tight that they couldn't kneel down to pray. So while people were wearing really tight hose, you probably didn't see a lot of things on the everyday. And even if you did, it was probably not something that required a lot of comment. There are people who are showing things off, and there are people who are not showing things off. So I don't know if this answers your question about why people would wear such short tunics, such tight hose, except for that it's fashion. And sometimes people like to do things that are a little bit risque and put themselves out there as being fashion forward. Being fashion forward or wanting to be is certainly something that is not exclusive to us today. So Ruby, good luck with your studying. I hope that you get back to studying at some point. Thank you so much for your question. So coming to the end of our questions, I was asked a question by my friend Emily Nichols, who is this amazing public speaker. So if you want someone who is going to bring super enthusiasm to your event, check her out. She is my friend on Instagram. You can find her there. Emily asked me if I could get any recognition for my work through the Medieval podcast or my books or my writing for medievalist.net, all of that stuff. If I could get recognition for it, what would that look like? What would the ideal recognition look like? And this is an interesting question. I think maybe we should all ask ourselves at some point. When I was in my 20s, I ended up going to a lot of funerals. Just sometimes this happens in our lives, right? And when I went to those funerals, of course, I was left thinking about legacy, about what I would want to leave behind, what I would want people to say about me. And so this has sort of formed and informed how I have lived in those years since. And this is something that has become sort of a trend as well. Think about your last days. How would you want people to remember you? Although, come to think of it, this is something that medieval people were telling us already. So certainly not something that came out of my own brain, fully formed like Athena from the head of Zeus. But when I think about legacy, when I think about the things that I have done in my career, there are things that I am proud of. And I think that's a wonderful thing to have. Like, I finished my TED Talk in 2017, and I thought, even if all of the things that I talked about become updated in the way that people are talking about history in the years to come, I know that I've done something that I really believed in. And I feel the same way about this podcast. So even if I stop doing this podcast tomorrow or I get abducted by aliens, I feel like I've done something that contributed positively to the world. And that is enough in and of itself. So I don't really look for recognition like, am I going to get a podcast award? Like, probably not. But that's not why I do this. And I mean, I think that is true of so many people who do work that they love. They do it because they love it. But it made me think about speaking to someone, the great Deborah McGrady, who's going to be on the podcast in a couple of weeks. She's lovely. And I sort of said to her without really thinking about it that one thing I've always wanted to get is my PhD. So I finished my master's. I stopped my education so that I could have my children because I didn't want to be having children, much later in life. I wanted to have them while I was still in my 20s. So I had my children with the thought that I would come back and do my PhD. And I never did because when I looked at it from that perspective, it was going to be super expensive and there was not going to be any work. So I chose not to do my PhD. But it was something that I had always wanted to do. And at this point, I recognize I probably will not get my PhD. Maybe I'll be able to work on it when I'm 65 and here in Canada, I think we get to do university for free. I'll have to look into that. It may be different when I get to 65. But it would be really cool to get that brass ring, to ring the bell, to say that I actually did it. I got all the way. So that's something that I don't think about every day. But sometimes I have a secret thought that comes up that maybe someday I will get an honorary one. So if there was ever any recognition that I would want, I think that would feel pretty good. But this isn't something that people just hand out. So it's not something I expect to get. But since you asked, Emily, and you really challenged me to answer this, because thinking about recognition for myself is not something that I do very comfortably, as you can probably tell from how my voice is coming across now. But yeah, I think if I finished out my life at 95 or 105 or 115 or whatever, and I had my PhD, I think that would feel pretty awesome. So yes, Emily, you challenged me to answer this question. I hope that you were happy with the answer in the end. So that is the end of the questions that were sent to me. Apparently, Peter from medievalist.net has one more question for me, so let's get to that. Well, it wouldn't be episode 300 if we didn't have Peter here to tell us what's on the website. But first, he has a question for me, right? Peter, what's your question?
Well, first, congratulations on 300 episodes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I think I kind of dreamt that we'd get to 250 or something, but 300, wow. You're doing pretty good.
Thanks. Just keep moving. Keep moving.
So my question for you is basically, because we've been chatting here and there about, career plans and such. I was kind of wondering, where do you see yourself by the time episode 600 comes around?
So if this is 300 episodes and I've put in 6 years doing this, then 600 episodes is another 6 years of doing this. And I'm not one for 5-year plans in that, like, in the last 6 years, my life turned completely upside down. And I hit a couple branches on the way down before I bounced back up again. In terms of personal life, my career has been like moving along so wonderfully, and I can't complain about that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that I never know where I'm going to be in 5 years. It's always a surprise to me. So I have no idea. I do know that I'm really enjoying doing this podcast, and I just want to keep doing fun things. So I have a book proposal in the works, which I think is really fun, but I have to get that finished so I can get it out. So I'd really like to have another few books out in 6 years. I'd like to keep doing this podcast. I've really enjoyed my time working with Sony, maybe a couple more projects like that are a surprise to me, but super fun. And it would be nice to do some video, I think. But yeah, I mean, who knows? Because I started this when my oldest daughter was like 1 year old, and now she's going to be moving out of the house soon.
Oh my.
So
Yeah.
my kids in 6 years, my kids will be launching out onto lives of their own. And so who knows what's going to happen? So you've actually asked me probably the toughest question today. I have no idea, but I hope it's fun.
Okay. Yeah. No, I always want to give you a stumper, but yeah, I guess, like it's, your journey has been like lots of ups, a few downs and challenges and things like that. There always seems to be like some exciting thing that comes along.
Yeah, but it's always been a surprise. Like a lot of the projects that I've done, things like when I was on simulation mode, which was a live streaming thing. And then when I was doing This is History projects with Sony, like none of these things were things that I necessarily sought out or expected. And so, yeah, it's one of those things where the people who have been listening to this podcast for a long time know that I learned a lot when I was working through things in my personal life. A lot of that stuff is in How to Live Like a Monk. But one of the things that I've learned is to have goals, have intentions, but really hold them lightly because you just don't know what's going to happen. And that's exciting. But it means that like I don't have a 5-year plan.
All right. Good.
Not the answer you were expecting, right?
Well, I say good luck with the next 300 episodes.
Oh,
It'll
thank
be
you.
fun. So, man, I'm going to have to be doing 300 more episodes. Oy.
Oh, poor Peter. You're going to have to keep putting content out on medievalist.net. So what have you got out there this week?
Yeah. The computer is back working, so I can repost material. And one thing we have is Caerphilly Castle has reopened. Yay. So,
nice. This is one of the big, beautiful castles in Wales.
Indeed, the largest castle in Wales. And they have been doing a 2-year conservation project, which cost £8 million.
Worth it, though. Worth it. Have you got pictures?
We do, thanks to Codway, the Welsh heritage branch of the government. So yeah, it looks like they did wonderful work. Some beautiful gardens that they've created within the castle. Some nice rooms as well, to kind of showcasing what it was like when they were partying in the 14th century.
I mean, I love a good 14th century party. That's my jam.
Indeed. So we've got that. Plus we have a piece that's doing very well on the website right now called 12 Medieval Life Tips from a 12th Century Genius.
12th Century Genius. Who are we talking about here?
We're talking about Alain de Lille, one of those 12th century Renaissance scholars, wrote various works. His fellows really looked up to him. One of his works is called the Parabole, which has these little kind of parables of life wisdom and things like that. And I picked 12 that I really liked.
Awesome. Well, I know that he had some kind of spicy ideas at times. The first time I ever met Alain de Lille was in Suzanne Conklin Akbari's class at University of Toronto. I don't know that I'm his biggest fan, but I'm looking forward to seeing what tips he has for us.
My favorite is this one. You can hope for a day after night, sun after clouds, a smile and happiness after tears.
Yes. I mean, that is what makes life worth living, is that hope that we have for sun after clouds. Okay. He's charmed me.
He's given us hope for the next 300 episodes.
I wouldn't call the first 300 a cloud. Jeez, Peter. Why are you here anyway? Well, thank you for stopping by, Peter, for 300 episodes. And I will see you again next week.
Thanks.
I'm so grateful to all of you for hanging out with me for 300 episodes. And I'm hoping you'll want to hang out with me over on This is History this summer, where I've taken over the Regency for Dan Jones. Starting next week, I'll be telling the story of Francis Charles VI in a mini-series called The Glass King. And to give you a sense of it, Sony has sent over the trailer for the series. So check this out. He was a young, dashing king, married to a beautiful queen, and adored by the people. Together, they ruled a kingdom that had finally won its territories back from its ancient arch-rival. It's late 14th century France, in the court of Charles VI, a king who will come into his own as Charles the Beloved. But the fairy tale can't last. Soon, Charles becomes someone who is feared and then pitied. In a forest near Le Mans, the beloved king snaps, attacking his brother and killing 5 of his own men. In time, even the slightest touch gives the king chills. Charles believes his body is made of glass, ready to splinter at any moment. As the king's mind falls to pieces, the princes of France fight for dominance and slowly tear Charles's kingdom apart. I'm Danièle Cybulskie, a historian and author, and over 6 gripping episodes, we'll step inside the kingdom that's moments away from shattering. There'll be feuding families, decadent parties, powerful queens, rebellions aplenty, and ambushes that would make the mafia blush. This is a story of power, greed, and brazen ambition. But the question is, who's breaking first? Listen to This Is History Presents The Glass King, wherever you get your podcasts, from Tuesday, July 29th. In celebration of The Glass King and my episode 300, Sony is giving my listeners a 20% discount for the first month of a subscription to This Is History over on Patreon, which will give you access to early episodes of my new series, the whole back catalog of This Is History, including The Iron King, and bonus episodes where Dan Jones and I talk history and get ridiculous, as we tend to do. So thank you to Sony for recognizing the awesomeness of my amazing listeners. And if you're interested in getting that discount, head over to patreon.com/thisishistory and use the coupon code GLASSKING, all one word, before August 1st to get 20% off your first month. I hope to see you there. And speaking of Patreon, this is the moment where I send out big thanks to all the people on patreon.com/medievalists for supporting my work. Because without you, this podcast just would not exist. I can't thank you enough for being there and for helping me bring medieval history to the airwaves every week. And thank you to each and every one of you who lets those ads roll through and who shares my work with your friends, because honestly, every little bit helps, not only me, but our collective knowledge of history. And that brings us to the end of episode 300. So, for everything from podcasts to cannon blasts, follow medievalist.net on Instagram at medievalistnet or Blue Sky at medievalists. You can find me, Danièle Cybulskie, across social media at 5MIN Medievalist or 5 Minute Medievalist. And you can find my books at all your favorite bookstores. Our music is by Christian Overton. Thanks for listening and have yourself a wonderful day.